My goal with this apartment over the years of living here, I wanted this feeling of opening up the door to a cupboard or a closet and every single time to go, oh, look how nice this looks. I'm Rajiv, and today I'm going to take you on another tour of my apartment. When I first moved into this space, the walls were all beige, the ceiling was beige, it was just a big, empty, beige box. But the thing that I loved about this space is that it had bones, and it had subtle beauty in just the small elements that are historic. There's trim around the door frames, and there are baseboards. Those are the old profiles of molding that are now 100 years old, and that stuff was left intact. Not only was it left intact, but there were so many layers of paint on all of that trim, and I saw that. Even though I had walked into this space and it had been freshly painted so that they could rent it out again, I could see that under the fresh paint were maybe 100 layers of paint. That really appealed to me. And over the course of 10 years, that's how long I've lived here, it's turned into my home. So although it's just a rental, although it's not very big, this is the place where I feel like I have the space to create things. This is the space where I feel like I can learn, and I need to focus, and I need to concentrate. And having an environment that feels like it's motivating me to do that is really important to me. I have had a lot of requests from people asking me to tell them what color the walls are. You shouldn't pick a color based on what you see on a screen or even in a magazine. That might be a starting point for you. Like, you might look at these walls and think, oh, I think I would like my space to be like that. So it's a grayish blue color. But just taking this exact color and putting it on your walls may not necessarily have this effect, because the color is hugely affected by the light. The light that comes in from these windows is what makes this space look this way. So you get all your paint swatches, you bring them home, and then you look at the swatch in this light. The color doesn't look the same on every wall. The light hits every wall differently. So I held it up on this wall. I held it up on this back wall. I held it up on the opposite wall. And I also did that at different times of day. I did it in the morning, I did it in the afternoon, and I did it with all of these swatches. And I would mark the swatches. I would mark them with little ticks, like saying, no, this doesn't look good in the evening, or this looks great in the morning. And what ended up happening is I think I eliminated it down to like 2. You don't go back to the paint store and buy the whole can. You buy a little test can, a small can. So I bought both of these and brought them home and painted the walls. And then I sat with that for a few days or a week, and I looked at what the paint actually looked like on the wall in a big square for the course of a week in varying lights. And that's how I ended up with this one. So if you're picking color for a room, that's how you do it. And color is it's so important. It's one of the main blocks of putting a room together. Another block is the rug, because the rug on the floor of this room is really big and it's colorful. The third big block is the furniture. And then there are small blocks, and the small blocks are the side chairs, the curtain, the paintings, and the accessories. These are 2-piece vases that I threw on the pottery wheel in sections. So I made this piece and this piece separately, and then I joined them together. There's a crane on here, and cherry blossoms, cherry trees, and the moon. I was just looking at old pieces and emulating what was on them. I also have a really old piece of blue and white porcelain that was made in China at least 100 years ago. And I love having both of those things in this one room, the stuff that I made and then the stuff that serves as the actual inspiration for these pieces. The key thing that I believe makes a house a home or makes an apartment a home is that that space has a soul. Do you walk into someone's place where they live and do you feel something when you're in there? You can live in a little hut, and if you imbue it with a sense of yourself, even that tiny little hut becomes something that has a soul. And that is something that cannot be manufactured. So when this person reached out through Instagram, her name is Pam Sorrells from Florida. When she reached out and said, I would love to make you something, I looked at her work, and everything she makes entirely by hand. She cuts out all the pieces of cloth and stitches every single piece by hand. And then she quilts the whole thing by hand too. So I asked Pam if she might make me a quilt out of my grandmother's and my mom's old silk saris. And she said yes, and I sent the saris to her, and this is what arrived. Just like a month ago. I think it took Pam 3 months to make, but I can't believe that she made this by hand. So here, this is called the log cabin pattern, and these are the pieces. So they're rectangular pieces that were all stitched together by hand. And she asked me, sort of as she was putting the blocks together, she said, may I ask who did the saris belong to, like the blue one and the striped one? And I told her that the striped one belonged to my mom and the blue one was my grandmother's. And she said, isn't that interesting? Because the blue in the center of every block, it signifies home. It's not just a nap. It's not just a blanket. It's not just a quilt. It's so much more than that. And when you do that with so many aspects of your everyday, when all of these little practices that you're doing on a daily basis become imbued with meaning and connections to actual people that you know or people that you love, you go to bed at night, and although it was a plain, normal day, that day was filled with joy, and it was filled with beautiful things and sentimental feelings that are lasting. In a room, there should be one main thing that is the focus of that room. It's just the thing that your eye is drawn to. What's the one thing in the room that when you walk into the room, that's the thing that makes you go, wow. In various iterations of this living room, the very first big thing that was in here, that was that one thing, was the landscape painting. That landscape painting was the focal point of the room, and it was behind the sofa, and the whole room was kind of light brown color. And then when I decided I wanted to paint the room gray, I painted the room gray, I moved the landscape painting to this wall, and I had the sofa reupholstered to yellow. So then the sofa became the one thing. When you stepped into this room from the hallway, your eyes couldn't help but just go to this bright yellow couch. At that time, I had a little troubadour harp, and I was playing the harp regularly, and then at some point, I transitioned from the little harp to the big harp. And when the big harp came in here, I realized there were two things in the room that were competing with each other. There was the yellow sofa and the harp. When you walked into this room, it was like, which one is the star of the show? Both of them wanted to be stars of the shows. And you can't have 2 stars. You have to have 1 star. There's only one person's name that should go on the, what is it called? The thing above the cinema? Marquee. There's only one name on the marquee. Bonnie Charlie, that's its name. And it's named Bonnie Charlie because the very first song that I was learning on this piece is an old Scottish folk song called Will Ye No Come Back Again? And the first line of that piece is, Bonnie Charlie's now away, safely o'er the friendly main. So when the new rug came into the space, I decided it was time to change the sofa one more time, to change it another color, because the yellow didn't go with the color of the rug. The sofa was sent out. It was reupholstered by Albert Vitiello's team to a gray, and when the sofa became gray, the harp became the star of the room. Found that over the years of carefully curating every single object that comes into this space, when I pull these things out to actually use them, every object that I touch and that I plug in and that I clean, every single thing that I'm using becomes something that I actually love. Like, it's not just functional, but it's beautiful as well. If you have a room that's just full of old things, it becomes a period room. It feels like the set of a historic series. Bringing in something more contemporary or contemporary feeling makes the old things pop. And conversely, in a very modern contemporary space, I always feel like even if there's just one thing in there, one small thing or one large thing that's old, the modern contemporary things, they just come to life and they look better because they're sitting in contrast. I had this problem of a big blank space above the sofa, and I knew that I wanted something that was not a painting, that was not an image of something, but something that felt a little more contemporary. So Guy Wolf was given these boards by his teacher, Mrs. Carl, and Mrs. Carl had saved them from a schoolhouse, an old schoolhouse that was being taken down, and he wasn't using them. So he offered them to me, and as soon as I saw those pieces of slate, I knew that that was the perfect thing to put above the sofa. So these went up, and I've been using them. I've been using them a lot for these videos, for the title cards, but even when there's nothing written on them, I just think they're really, there's something about them. There's so much character in the slate. Nothing feels as wonderful as chalk on actual slate. And in its basic form, you have 2 elements of nature coming together. You have chalk, which is actually just mined out of the ground or from a cliff, white chalk, and then you have this dark stone, which is also quarried. That's what a piece of chalk and a chalkboard is. And that to me is really beautiful. Black and white from nature to create something that's so functional that we all know about. There's a William Morris quote that I love. Have nothing in your homes that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. This little kitchen is a jewel box for me. I redid the kitchen in the pandemic. I did a lot of the work myself. I repainted the cupboards, and I did the woodwork, and I painted the walls. This philosophy of having things that are not just utilitarian, but that are also beautiful, it makes every household practice. It makes things that are mundane actually enjoyable. This kitchen really epitomizes that. So this cupboard here, this actually might be my pride and joy of the kitchen. This cupboard, before I redid the kitchen, was a big jumbled mess of bags of brown sugar and bags of spilling flour. And I decided when I was reading the kitchen that I was going to make this cupboard very beautiful. It's completely functional. It houses all the pantry staples, but I decided I was going to put everything in these old mason jars. Some of the mason jars have glass lids, like this one, and these little wires that hold them in place. And some of the mason jars have these metal lids. And both of the jars in here, they just look great together. This little container, not everything in here is a mason jar. I found this in Indiana, and I didn't know what I was going to use it for when I found it, but I knew that it would go in this cupboard, and it houses these tiny bird's eye chilies, which are really hot. Even one chili is deadly. Look at that. Look how nicely that fits in there. Okay, let's move to the closet. If you want to stay organized, if you want things to feel like this, you have to learn how to throw things away. Marie Kondo, I bow to you because you really taught me. It is the life-changing magic. As the title of the book states, every single word is the truth. It's the life. Look, just how does this feel? How does it feel to go from this to this is a thrill. This is 4 years old now. And every single time I just open the closet to take out some clothes, I still feel the same way. This lady was magic. I don't want this closet to be a jumbled mess. And the only way that's possible is by constantly editing. So if I go out there and I buy a new shirt and I bring it in here, I get rid of a shirt. Every time you need to get a white t-shirt, you need to go into this box. Yes, but look at the thrill. I just open up this box and it brings me joy. Feels like going to a store every time I pull out a t-shirt. This is why I have no friends. This is where I do my work, like my calligraphy commissions. This is also where I do a lot of my artistic practice. And I took something out of the closet to show you. This is my crocodile. I call it my crocodile. It's very old. It's a crocodile or alligator case from France. I don't know when it was made. But this thing is where I store all of my watercolor studies. Looking at the studies periodically, it helps me. It helps me to remember what to work on. It helps reinforce what I am getting, what I'm learning. And it's also just inspiring to see progression. Like this is where I started with Marcelo, just doing simple color washes. This was the very first thing we did together. He said, just mix one color, do light, medium, and dark, and try to do a wash where there are no streaks. He demonstrated there were no streaks. I attempted to do it, every brush stroke had a streak. I'm copying a John Singer Sargent painting. Here's a little study of the archway under Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. This was painting the view from my gym window, and this was Marcelo's version, and this was mine, and we did it side by side. Copy of an Ingres painting from one of Marcelo's homework exercises, and then this was the third attempt at the same painting. So I keep these because when I put them side by side, I can see what I learned, and that's really valuable. This little nook has an interesting story. So most of the buildings on this block were built between 1880 and 1900. And at the time, there was a line, like a building line, to which the buildings could be built, like a border. And this lot was owned by a woman who refused to sell it to the developers. She just refused. So the lot sat vacant and empty. And then she died, and she left the property to her children. And the children sold the property after their mother's death. And this building was built in 1920. And in 1920, the property line had changed. And the property line had moved up 3 feet. So the builders built the building 3 feet further into the street. And that is what gave them this window. So when I look out onto my street, there are no other buildings blocking my view because they were all older. And I thank the lady, I'm not going to say her name, but I thank her for holding on to the property and not selling it, because it's because of that decision that I have this window. Home is a place that you come back to at the end of every day. When you close the door, I really feel it's important that you have a space where you can be at peace again and you can recharge. And that's why I really do feel like this space is sacred. I actually speak aloud to this apartment. I love this place so much that when I'm leaving, when I'm going on a trip, when I have to fly like overseas or something, I actually say goodbye to it as I'm leaving before I close the door. I really feel sad to leave, and it compels me to say out loud, bye, I'll see you soon. And when I come back after being away, especially after being overseas, and I walk into that door, I say a line from Out of Africa that I love, hello, the house.